Thank you all for being here today. I'm very pleased to be there in Almine Rech Gallery. Thank you, Almine, for the invitation. Thank you, Francesco, for the invitation. I'm very pleased to talk to you again.
Thank you.
We know each other for years now.
Yes.
And it's always a pleasure to have a conversation with you. My name is Thibaut Wychowanok. I'm the editor-in-chief of Numéro art magazine.
My name is Francesco Vezzoli. I'm an artist.
Yeah, or maybe we can start a little bit with you, Francesco. You're an artist, but if I had to say something about you, not as a friend, but as an artist.
Yes.
I would say that Francesco, for years, has been a kind of matrice, artist matrice of our time. What I mean by that is that Francesco, from the very beginning of his career, and still today, is exploring the future, is trying to find out what will be our future. And 20 years ago, he did that. And the future he was exploring is now our reality. So it's very interesting because he's still doing that today. He's still doing that in this precise exhibition. It can be surprising because this exhibition is about Karl Lagerfeld and Memphis, so it's about the past in a way. But maybe we'll see in the conversation that it is about our time and about the future too. To say a little bit more about this idea that you are a matrice of our time, that you are exploring the matrice of what we are today. Imagine that Francesco did many years ago something about America Great Again. It was a video that you did, Democracy,
Yes.
with Sharon Stone, saying, "Make America Great Again." Imagine that. It was about politics, it was about communication, and it was like 20 years ago.
15, yes.
15, imagine that.
And sometimes people think it's a recent work and they say, you're making a parody of Donald Trump. I said, no, I made it 15 years ago.
Yeah, imagine that. And Francesco also explore. Sometimes people think that all his work is about glamour, but it's not about glamour. It's more than that. And he explored, this idea that celebrities would be very important one day. And imagine now we have Kim Kardashian everywhere. We have social...
As an actress.
As an artist, we have social media. And that's something that we explored for years. But today, so we are still talking about that in a way, but through the lens of Memphis, through the lens of Karl Lagerfeld, through the lens of Monaco, because that's something I had to add about Francesco Vezzoli. We are talking about that. He's not doing exhibition, he's doing project. And every project is really, about also the context. So the gallery context, here we are in a beautiful gallery, Almine Rech Gallery, but the context is also Monaco. And every time he's doing a project, he's thinking about the context, what it means to show something in this precise context. So maybe, it's a long introduction, I'm very sorry, but I think it's very important to understand how we can explore this precise exhibition, And I think it's very interesting also to see how now you're thinking about our time in relationship to the past and what Memphis or Karl Lagerfeld can say to us today. So my first question, Francesco, maybe let's start with the beginning and about this exhibition. What can we see in this exhibition? It's always important to start with the work. And then we'll explore more. But what can we see? What was the project here?
The project was very simple. Simple for me is not a negative word. Simple was the fact that I've been obsessed always by Memphis. And above everything, I was obsessed by the fact that one of the first and most important client that Memphis ever had was a gentleman called Karl Lagerfeld, who in 1982 went to Milano and saw all the Memphis furniture collection that was just starting to appear. And he went to their showroom and he bought 150 pieces. So when he bought 150 pieces, he knew he was going to move to Monte Carlo. So it was a very deliberate choice to live in someone else's brain, live in someone else's ideal world. I've been obsessed by this famous apartment of KARL that was located here in Monte Carlo in the Roccabella building, designed by Gio Ponti, which is another interesting layer in this kind of archaeosocial cosmogony that we are talking about. And it's this apartment, for me, aligns with very few other cases in history of design and architecture. I think probably only the relationship between, to mention a French figure, Charles de Bestéguy and Le Corbusier, when Charles de Bestéguy commissioned to Le Corbusier the apartment, and then I think they ended up having an argument. Or I think the Holston Paul Rudolph residence. I think very few apartments or houses in history of architecture or design have been as obsessive as the Lagerfeld Memphis residence. And so I wanted to celebrate a moment in history where people were probably more daring and were more eccentric, but strangely enough, by being more eccentric, they were as well more scientific and more respectful. They would give carte blanche to another creative person. And when you see it's very hard in contemporary culture, if you look at famous artists, I'm not going to make names, famous actors or actresses, or even famous collectors, nobody has the courage to commission like a house as daring as the one that KARL did in terms of aesthetics. So I want to celebrate that courage. On top of that, if I may say, being in Monte Carlo, where Karl Lagerfeld was one of the resident gods, I want to celebrate a moment of his life, a part of his identity, and because I do believe, like some months ago, I was in. Karl wouldn't be happy that I bring up Dolce & Gabbana, but I was in Milano on a weekend alone, and in Palazzo Reale there was the Dolce & Gabbana retrospective. And it was actually the end of the football championship, so I imagined that the exhibition would be kind of empty or just with people there, fashionistas. And to my complete dismay and surprise, I entered the Dolce & Gabbana exhibition and I've seen lots of families, fathers with trolleys with kids, and they were like explaining to their children the embroideries, looking at the dresses. I do believe that fashion figures have major cults in the public audience that go beyond gender orientation and all this stuff, and so it ended up that the Dolce & Gabbana exhibition at Palazzo Reale was the most attended exhibition ever in the history of Palazzo Reale, and it came to Paris. I know it was an absurd success in Paris, and now it's going to Palazzo dell'Esposizione in Rome, where I did a big show on archaeology a couple of years ago. So it's to finish this answer. It's a nod. It's a wink. It's my way of saying, hey, guys in the art world, watch out, because figures that are leaving a mark on public imagination very often belong to the fashion world, but the art world is not really kind of paying attention. The art world is only paying attention to fashion only when they want to find a sponsor for an exhibition.
Yeah, you're right. I promise we'll come back to the key figure of Karl Lagerfeld and also to this idea of the prevalence of fashion. But to stay a little bit more on the exhibition and we have to say that you reproduce the apartment, but you reproduce as much as possible the apartments. All the pieces are exactly the same as the one that one could see at KARL Apartments. And that's also interesting, knowing your work, because your work is most of the time always about this idea of fake and real. So this is fake because we are not in the apartment, but this is real because this is a real pieces. And the exhibition was made in collaboration with MEMPHIS company, who helps you to do so. Could you tell me more why it was so important to reproduce the apartment in a gallery? I think it's also a statement to change the way we look at an art gallery. There is a few paintings, I would say, but it's more about design today. And also this idea about fake and real, because it is very strong in your practice.
Yes, the fake versus real has always been very strong in my practice since the day we met. I was doing back then a pilot for a TV show, and then I did the fake election campaign. I did the trailer for a movie that didn't exist with Roman Polanski. I did the perfume commercial with Natalie Portman before she became the face of Dior perfume. That was 10 years before. So yes, it's fake versus real. And what I love the most is that people enter Almine's gallery and they should be taken by surprise. I mean, for me, the biggest compliment you paid to me was that every time I do a project, and this project is made specifically for that place. In that sense, I do believe that that's a gesture of respect, as a gesture of respect that an artist should have, regardless of the circumstances. Whether even if you're a very, very young artist and you're doing your first show in a unknown galleries, every place has its own meaning. In my case, if I do a show in Rome at Palazzo delle Esposizioni that is about archaeology, of course I will relate to the palatial architecture, and I put it into connection with the imperial concept of power expressed through decoration and architecture. Here, the context of Monte Carlo was fundamental. Fake versus real, as you said, is a perfect mirror as well of the art world today. So I can't imagine anything better than recreating this conflict in Monte Carlo. Monte Carlo as well is a place where fake mixes with real. You know, it's about this tremendous showing off, and you quite do not understand where the real wealth is, the real glamour is, and so you do, if you are a sensitive person, you do have to respond to the circumstances you're being given. I think if you're an artist, so the only exhibitions I don't like are the ones not of good artists or bad artists, but are the ones that are completely forgetting the context.
But you could have done an exhibition about Grace Kelly, except that you already did in a way.
But that was the other options.
And then you decide that it would be KARL Apartment in Monaco and Memphis. So we have to maybe talk about Memphis, what it means, because it was such an important moment in not only in design, I would say, but and specifically in Italy. So before even talking about Memphis and why this group was so important, let's talk about the context in Italy and how Memphis came up to life at this point and what it was so revolutionary in the field of design, but not only.
Yes, it was what the period that in Italy was called Anni di Piombo, where Germany had the Baader-Meinhof, we had the Red Brigades, we had lots of kidnapping. Italy was a very complicated place from the political point of view, and from the socio-economical point of view. It was a bit like a civil war. In Italy, we call them anni di piombo, the lead years, which means like probably the darkest moment that post-war Italy has lived in the last 60 or 70 years. So design had key figures like Achille Castiglioni or Enzo Mari. They were the big pillars. Enzo Mari was probably much more ideological and politicized. Castiglioni was more technical-oriented, gimmicky. But obviously their socio-political position was very obvious. You know, they were political. They were extremely serious. But the 80s were about to arrive, and obviously the design and architecture community needed something that would reflect this change that was on its way and that needed to be reflected in the aesthetics. So in 1980, 1981, 1982, this group of architects, they got together, and I guess their secret mantra was to use in their design all the things that the other designers had forgot, which was color, fake marble, fake wood, fake crocodile prints, and to have lots of irony, to play with lots of colors. I mean, the palette of Enzo Mari ranges from white to gray to black to steel to glass to back to rough wood, and so it seemed that Memphis was like a nemesis to all that vocabulary. And it was embraced by people because people were so exhausted by the civil war, they needed some form of liberation. So they embraced Memphis, whether the liberation had arrived or not, because they needed a ray of sunshine to come through the window.
And there is a strong connection between Memphis and you, talking about the colors, because I remember telling me that at some point, history of art erased colors. That in antiquity there were colors everywhere, and that the way we look at sculpture today, the way we look at wall drawings, it's without colors. But the truth is that color, the good taste, is about something gray, about something dark, but the reality of it was colorful. And yes, that's something you are dealing with in some of your exhibition and projects.
Yes, that's something I could say I really studied. It's the coloration of antique sculptures, which is a discipline. There are hundreds of books. Especially in Germany, there are lots of professors that are considered the most expert on this topic. And by now we know for sure that, let's just mention one monument that speaks for all of them, the Arapacis in Roma. And now if you go to visit the Arapaci, now it's completely white marble, next to it there is a video and a computer no, it's not even artificial intelligence. It's just like one of those old style, like animated renderings, which shows you that the Arapacis was as brightly colored, not even as an Hermes scarves, but I would say as a Versace scarf, which there is a slight difference. And so like really bright emerald greens, bright orange, deep red, etc., etc. Now we know for sure that the past was colored. And as we discussed in many of our conversation, history and different movements, they tend to erase this color as a kind of a distasteful element. Funnily enough, to bring an extra kind of touch, I was to do a TV program. We went together with Alberto to the Gipsoteca Canoviana, which is this beautiful museum of all the plasters of Canova. It's a museum designed by Carlo Scarpa. And they asked me about this famous sculpture of Ebe, La Coppiera degli Dei. Ebe is the goddess that pours the nectar for the gods and the goddesses. So the iconography of Ebe is that she's always a beautiful girl, very young, with like an elegant, sober dress, and she has like a little, how do you say, cantilever, like a little brocca, the thing you used to pour the wine. How do you say it in English? Huh? Pitcher, exactly. And Canova made the picture of Ebe in gold-plated or bronze, I don't know, but like when he exhibited for the first time his beautiful sculpture of Ebe, Ebe had a very bright picture. Bright, flashing, and because it was gold, it was reflecting. And the critics of the days, they said to Canova, yes, the sculpture is beautiful, but the golden picture is unacceptable, it's too tacky. So this is the history of the world. Somehow the market, the critics, the history, I don't know. It's an inevitable mechanism. People, they want to erase from artifacts what is probably most challenging. Even Canova, who was the king of neoclassicism, had to get through trouble to make sure that the picture of Ebe was accepted in bright gold. So that explains everything. Like the tendency of the market, of the world, of the spectators is to erase the troubling element.
Which brings us to a new question about the role of the artist behind art. In front of, the art critic, or in front of the institutions, what is the role of the artist? What is the role of Memphis? And what is your role today? Being an iconoclast?
This is the most difficult question. For me, the artist should still... allora, if the artist wants to go to war, he has to make sure he's fighting for the most ethical country and supported by the most ethical like financier. If you don't want to go to war, you can be Goya and make drawings of the disasters of war. You can be William Hogarth and make sarcastic commentaries on societies like Pietro Longhi. You can be like, you can describe society like Proust. For me, the final point should always be that the artist in some ways should reflect the world. At least that's my idea. So for me, it comes completely, whenever they see one of my old videos and they say, you wanted to be a movie director. I said, no, I never wanted to be a movie director. I was making a commentary on the state of video art. Or if they ask me, you did the 24-hour museum, I said, yes, I did 10, 12 years ago, a project called 24-hour museum. I was making a commentary on the pop-up notion of institutions today. So for me, my art is always a form of comment of the universe that I seem to inhabit. So I really appreciated the way you described my work in the beginning. When I did the Democracy, I didn't think it was a political work, but I made anything I could to convince Sharon Stone and Bernard-Henri Lévy to be my candidates for American presidency. And this was the piece at the core of the Italian pavilion at the Venice Biennale. And I clearly remember lots of great European collectors and critics appreciating the work and liking it. Actually, now it comes in my mind that now the work is both in the collection of Pinault and of the Arnaud collection, but not one single person from the United States even remotely approached me to buy that work or to discuss it. And they didn't even want to review it. And I'm I mean, I don't want to sound arrogant, but you said it. It's so hilarious that all of that I'm describing in the video then became a reality, but in a much more complicated way. So yes, I guess my work is always a form of a commentary. That's my idea of being militant. Ecco.
Let's continue with Memphis, and we'll go back to this idea of a project and exhibition. But you mentioned previously with me that Memphis, Ettore Sottsass specifically, was also interesting in the way is, I don't know if I'm using the right term, but maybe sexualized the design. And I would like to know more about this notion, because it's not something that we hear a lot about Memphis or Ettore Sottsass. But I think it's very interesting, because not only because it's about sexuality, but because behind that there is different layers of understanding this design and their approach.
Well, first of all, not many people do know that the first wife of Ettore Sottsass was a woman called Fernanda Pivano, and she was the bridge maker between continental Europe and the Beat Generation. So she was the translator of Jack Kerouac, Ferlinghetti, and all the Beat poets. And so she traveled to the United States with Ettore Sottsass many times. So Ettore was not yet as active and as famous as he would become after the 80s, but obviously in that period of his life, he had the time, the freedom, and the pleasure of getting accustomed to the most radical literature movement, probably, or one of the most radical literary movement of the 20th century. Easily we could say the Beat Generation was that, without exaggerating. Probably he got an inspiration for creating Memphis as well. Maybe having been so close to a group of people that made their voice so heard in the global world, he knew that to have a strong voice, a movement was a wonderful way. And on top of that, we are all aware of the fact that the members of the Beat Generation movement, they were probably the most sexually fluid literary movement in history, at least for the 20th century. I mean, as a movement, as a group of people, as orientation, as a sense of freedom. So when Sottsass went back to become like the king of design and king of architecture, he, of course, did not cancel probably from his mind this kind of literary heritage and intellectual heritage. And I think he did put all that vibrant energy that he studied, that he lived through in the United States, in his own idea of architecture. And as a human being, since I knew him very well, I must say, without sounding not respectful to the other Milanese or Italian architects, he was the one that had the most open-minded vision on this kind of topics for the period and for the generation he was belonging to. So probably that drew to me as a child. When we opened the show here, my father came to the opening and he reminded me that he bought me a Memphis tie when I was 10 years old. So that was the beginning of all the troubles.
But we need to mention another aspect of Memphis, which is the political aspect. And also it can be interesting in such a city and such a kingdom to talk about these political aspects and the vision of Memphis, of maybe democratization, I would say, of design. And finally, everything ends up in Karl Lagerfeld apartment, which is kind of funny, ironic, I would say. That's another aspect that can be interesting to talk about, this political vision versus the reality, and maybe the clash between it.
Yes, I think democratic pricing was a mantra for all sorts of design. Because like whether it was a floss lamp by Castiglioni or Cassino, whatever, this type of furniture started with the ambition of being not for everybody, but for everybody or somebody who wanted to be an everybody, let's say. So design was born as a deeply democratic concept, especially if you look at the early works of, again, Castiglioni, Sarfatti. They were not highly expensive product. And the pricing of the Memphis product was done on that line. They were more elaborated pieces done with more expensive material, but all in all, their price was fair if considered the amount of manual work. They were not, there was no sense, the philosophy behind Memphis was not luxury. It's very important to say that, because sometimes you see it today in the house of wealthy people, or you think that, you know, he designed the house of Bruno Bischofberger and such and such, and then you get the wrong impression. But like Memphis was democratic ideas, an inclusive group of architects from all parts of the world, France, Italy, Japan, that didn't want to sell to the world their idea of luxury. They wanted to sell to the world their idea of happiness. Where we are now is the famous ring bed, which is actually a very twisted construction, because it has the shape of a boxing ring, which I think is a quintessential American, kind of American and European. Box was not part of Eastern culture, but the surface on where we are standing is a tatami, which is the base of the traditional Japanese bed, and these cushions are constructed in the way Japanese pillows are. And this tray as well evokes the kind of, because of the lacquer, etc., you find in traditional Japanese or Chinese culture. So this, and on top of that, there are these round-shaped lamps which could evoke, I don't know, the 30s in a barber shop in America. So this kind of hyper-eclectic mix was the ultimate thing. And what was the main sleeping product for the Memphis group? A ring. A ring as a metaphor of how conflictual probably a relationship could be. But maybe the ring is where you fight, but because it's a bed is where you end up making love. I don't know, I think it's so poetic, you know, and more people should celebrate Memphis, not just me.
But when you told me that that Karl Lagerfeld had a full apartment full of Memphis design pieces, I was so surprised, because that's not what one can expect from Karl Lagerfeld. We know him, of course, he was very cultivated.
He was very
cultivated.
Yes.
For sure. But most of the people have this idea that it was all about graphic design, about black and whites. And that's interesting, because it's giving a new vision also of Karl Lagerfeld. Maybe a Karl Lagerfeld that most of the people didn't know at the time.
No.
Or not like this, exactly.
No, but if you read about his relationship with Jacques de Bacher, what's most appropriate than a bed that it's as well a boxing ring? So, yes, it's very natural. I mean, I'm not even critical of this, but I guess when a group of ideas, they become, you know, extremely important, or they become a vehicle for huge amount of capitals, inevitably the roughness of it, the rough edges, they get smoothened up. I like to celebrate Karl's identity when probably he was more free to do crazy things. And so I know, for instance, that when the auction came up for the furniture, Gianni Pigozzi, who is a man with a lot of freedom, I would say, he bought the original ring bed. And I'm sure that if Pigozzi bought the original ring bed, it's because it has a metaphorical meaning. And I just, this exhibition is, as I said, maybe I'm repeating myself, but it's a bit of a celebration of a moment where collecting art, making art was a kind of, I don't know, if you look at the pictures of those days, you have a sense of a different type of power. In Italy, we have the two words, you have potere e potenza. I don't know if you have the same in French. You have pouvoir et puissance. Ecco. Allora, if you look at a picture of the art world today, you have pictures of people who have power, and if you look at the wedding of Paloma Picasso, you're seeing a lot of people with puissance.
But that's also maybe something that I need to add about your work, because I try to give some clues to understand your practice and your project. But maybe the most important one is that in every project you always try to question a system of value and a system of power. And actually that's also something that you are dealing with here. And you are talking about that through KARL Lagerfeld, through Memphis, what it means. And I think that KARL Lagerfeld in a way is also a figure of power. But is he on the side of puissance or in the side of pouvoir?
Allora, since I have no reason to have any kind of negative thinking about Lagerfeld, I think he had a parcours, you say that in French, which was totally normal. I think he was expressing his identity in a very free way. He was expressing his puissance. And then at some point he realized that the financial responsibility connected to his creativity, they were growing. And then probably being a good German, as I'd like to call him, he thought that he didn't want to betray this responsibility, so he felt compelled to behave like a serious creative person. But the roots of his identity were in the wildness. And this apartment is a proof of that. The pictures of that period are a proof of that. So it's okay. It's like artists, you know. And then you try to keep alive your wildness. I was invited to some of Lagerfeld shows in the Chanel period, and I think that even if he had become probably the highest paid creative director in the history of the world of fashion, and not only the highest paid, but probably the one responsible for the job of so many people, he tried to push the envelope from the perspective of a man that could have immense budgets. But for instance, I remember the supermarket fashion show for Chanel. I mean, he was still, even at the late part of his career, trying to put things into discussion. It was 40, 50 years after the days of Le Palace, but still he was trying to have fun and show fun to people. So all in all, for me, Karl Lagerfeld is one of those artists that have managed to keep their careers honestly challenging all throughout his life. And then at the end, just like Warhol, who that he was in awe of, even if he never probably managed to penetrate as much as he would have wanted the world of Warhol, I think he started surrounding himself of younger people that could become his disciples and that he could mentor, which is the only thing you can do when you become so famous and so important. You just want to absorb from the younger generation. No, I think Lagerfeld has done a good... I mean, even if Fassbinder would have arrived at the age of 80, you know, he would have arrived at the age of 80 without anybody giving him money to make movies, or making probably some movies out of a Thomas Mann fiction. But I think Lagerfeld has been true to himself.
So now it's time to talk about your artworks in the exhibition, because there are some and with Karl Lagerfeld. So can you explain a little bit these precise artworks, and maybe it's important to say that it's the connection that they have with previous work, because the role of the tears, for instance, in your work.
Yes, the strange thing is that I don't have a real studio. I don't have anybody who works for me. I do all the needleworks myself. All the pieces that I do are unique. When I make a sculpture, I buy an ancient Roman sculpture and I add parts to it. And that is even more unique, because what I like about that, now recently I discovered that the canvas we used to do the Lagerfeld needleworks in this exhibition is completely out of production. So even if somebody wants to copy one of my needlework, he cannot, because the factory has closed, so they're not producing the canvas anymore. Maybe this is very old style of me, but for me, there was a famous gallerist in Naples called Lucio Amelio, and I think he had a gallery at some point called Pièce Unique. And for me, if it's about translating your idea into something somebody should desire, the unicity is still a kind of a value. So all the embroideries in the exhibition, I made them myself. I print the canvas, and then I stay there at night with all the threads and the scissors and the beads and everything, and I do it myself, and I just and they're very personal. It's the only part of my work I never speak about, because if I should speak about them, it would be like those painters that say, "Oh, I paint like this because I feel like that," and I find that very presumptuous. So I don't know. When I look at my needleworks, for me they're like little poetries. Ecco, that's all. They're, to quote the Japanese, since we are in a Japanese bed, they're like haiku. But they are part of a bigger universe. But of course, I'm not stupid. So in this bigger universe that I am conceiving, there have to be cameos, which are my artworks. But it's not because I'm paying so much attention to the project. I'm not paying attention to the product. I'm paying an equal amount of attention to the product. That's why I'm doing so little. For me, it would be very easy to have an army of embroiderers and make more exhibition. I don't know if the market would absorb that. I'm not capable of telling that. But I've never structured my life or my career or my practice to be like that. So you either do like Memphis and those designers, that you do something that is for everyone. And so probably because I am from Milano, so I know the culture of what is supposed to be a product for everybody. So it's either for everybody or it's one of a kind. And I've chosen that since I'm an artist, I thought it should be one of a kind.
But that's also funny, because tell me if I'm wrong, when you started this broderie, the funny thing is that now, a lot of artists is trying to use textile or whatever, but you did it like from the very beginning. At this time, it was very surprising for a contemporary artist. So it was also already a little bit iconoclast at the time. And tell me if I'm wrong, but you started by the broderie with very famous paintings and adding tears on it.
Yes.
And now it's about Karl Lagerfeld.
Well, it's about reflecting the obsession of society. I felt this. We live in a moment in history where fashion is a very interesting. For me, the fact that the fashion industry is so powerful in this moment in history, it shows the true revenge against patriarchy. It's like fashion has become so powerful, not just from the perspective that it has a huge impact on the popular imagination, it has become financially powerful. So the dream of I like to think that when Pierre Berger bought a huge share of Le Monde, no? He bought Le Monde. He became the owner of. Yes, I'd like to think that that was the, after having dressed for 20 or 30 years the people that were pushing the buttons in the power room, they wanted to be in the power room, and they managed to. So it's a beautiful social and political transition. Unfortunately, not many people in the literary world, very few people in the financial world are capable of reading through these narratives. If you speak to, I don't know, like, I'll make a very simple example. When recently in Italy, Prada acquired Versace, which is it's a cultural gesture. It's like a big Italian company that it's buying back from America, a huge history of Italian creativity, that it's a common knowledge in the world. On the news at 8 of the different channels, yes, there was like 30 seconds, a minute kind of about it. But like after 1 week, a small bank was being sold in Italy to a shady guy in Rome. And that was like half an hour, TV shows, whatever. But I think from both perspectives, for the people on the street, they're more interested in who's buying Versace and not in who's buying that small obscure bank. And as well, in terms of the amount of money involved in the transition are much bigger, the ones involved in the Versace deal, than in that obscure bank. So there is a part of the world that is still more interested in somehow this kind of I would call it hetero-shrinking universe. And instead, the world of fashion, like that Dolce & Gabbana exhibition, everybody wants to belong to that. And so, but the art world doesn't seem to be wanting to talk about it, because probably they feel there is a conflict of interest, because they knock on the door of fashion to have their sponsorship, so they don't want to have a somehow critical or sociological approach to the topic. Does it make sense?
Yes, of course. But in this context, the figure of Karl Lagerfeld is very specific. Mm-hmm. Karl Lagerfeld was very cultivé. He was doing fashion for sure, but not only. He's interested into design, into art, into literature. So it's also interesting to think about Karl Lagerfeld today in comparison of, let's say, the leading figure of fashion today, let's say Kim Kardashian. And I remember a conversation we had before this exhibition, and you told me that it was two different kind of narcissism, and one was European, one was American, one was about, let's say, a fashion narcissism, and this is a connection with Karl Lagerfeld. And the other one was about a social media narcissism. And I would like you to explain more these two concepts and what they mean, because I think that it really helps to understand why the figure of Karl Lagerfeld, for instance, is very important.
I would say that the narcissism of Lagerfeld was a narcissism that was somehow, even if perceivable, it was being consumed in private somehow. It was a relationship something between him and his mirror. On the contrary, Kim Kardashian is a relationship between herself and her human mirror, which are those 350 million people that are looking at her. So it's a very different notion. There are points of contact, but it's a very different story. I would say that the fact that globally in universities, the the ratings of students that apply to study humanities is going down every year of 3%, 4% or more. I don't know. We should consult precise polls. I would say that between dinner with Kim Kardashian and dinner with Karl Lagerfeld, since I've had both, I would prefer dinner with Karl Lagerfeld because you learn something from the things he says. You learn something from Kim Kardashian, from the way she behaves, is a completely different notion. And I guess that is my answer to your idea of narcissism. You would learn from Karl, because of all the books that he read and all the things that he knew. From Kim Kardashian, you learn just by looking at the way she moves her body, the way she posts a picture while she's seated next to you. It's a different type of learning. However, the fact that now Kim Kardashian is commissioning a huge house to Tadao Ando is a sign that she has probably learned from the good ones.
Let's be clear, narcissism is not a critic, because I mean narcissism is a necessity. I would say mandatory in some way to construct oneself. So
it's a form of survival. You have to like yourself to go out in the world and fight your fight.
And to be powerful and creative, and so it's important to have this in mind when we talk about narcissism. But also the big difference, yes, as you say, is the way it's about culture, basically. It's that on one side you have a narcissism in fashion. Some people criticize it, but it's a way of constructing oneself, to be creative, and to be rooted in culture. And when one look at Karl Lagerfeld's show, for instance, it's rooted in so many layers of culture, references to paintings, references to design, to literature. And maybe that's something that miss at some point in the social media narcissism.
Well, the social media shift is gigantic, and certainly we will not make our conversation more interesting if we acknowledge it. The whole world is breaking their brains to describe what's happening. I've decided a long time ago not to have Instagram, because I think it would be so stressful to decide what representation I want to give to myself. It would be like a work. So I made my own little study on social narcissism of artists, and I realized that there are all the artists that are successful on Instagram, tangibly successful on Instagram, are artists that are not really respected by the so-called artistic community. The only exception, meaning the only figure that has high numbers and high institutional and critical respect, is, surprise, surprise, Cindy Sherman. But Cindy Sherman has constructed her entire career on this real fake idea, so she has turned the Instagram into a medium where she can practice all the identities that she wants to be, but not necessarily she wants to put in her artworks. So somebody smart should make a great book about the fact that the only artist that is able to cross the two lines is Cindy Sherman, which makes her, in my eyes, even a bigger artist than what she is. Probably the most relevant female artist in the post-war. And the fact that she has been able to embrace the social identity without losing herself, without looking ridiculous, but instead by making ridiculous the other people on the social media is quite genius. Grazie.